Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for making the time for this workshop this morning. My name is Ginger Gossman, and I am one of the GEER grant leads at the agency. We will begin promptly at 10:30, but that's still about 10 minutes away. Good morning again, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We will begin promptly in 5 minutes, um, and we really appreciate your attending this webinar. Morning, everyone. My name is Ginger Gossman, and I am one of the GEER grant leads for the coordinating board. We really appreciate your time this morning. We are trying to provide information for you on how to close out your GEER grants, and we have staff with us this morning who have expertise in that. So we really, again, appreciate your time this morning. We have someone from our general counsel office. Our representative from our financial services office was called away to other duties. So I will do my best to fill his shoes. But we are, as you can see, transcripting this meeting. We are recording this meeting, and we will be taking any questions we are unable to answer today to the staff who have the expertise, and be sure to turn those around quickly so that you have an answer as soon as we're able to provide one. So today we're really going to be talking about three general topics: all the dates that are of interest to you in terms of closing out your grants, closeout procedures, and return of funds. And of course, we're going to have plenty of time, we hope, for questions and answers. Also wanted to mention, that we are talking about GEER 1, the first tranche of federal funds that we have given out to institutions. Really, all of the money we've given out thus far has been GEER 1, so there really shouldn't be any considerations around GEER 2 at this point. But all of the money we're talking about were issued through the CARES Act and really should apply to all of you here on this call. This is a comprehensive list of all the GEER 1 grants that are active right now. We're including this slide as a courtesy so that if you have any questions after the webinar, please be sure to use the assigned email address to contact your grant manager. And here are all the lists. Here's the list of those grants and those associated emails. So please refer to this slide after we send it out for if you have any questions to follow up on this webinar. This format is very similar to another webinar we hosted in February in terms of optimizing your GEER award and allowable expenses. If you have any questions about allowable expenses, we really would encourage you to go back and review or rewatch that recording. It's posted on our website, and you'll have a link to this when we share the slides after this meeting today. So I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Doug Brock, who is in our Office of General Counsel. Doug, take it over.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for attending. This is, exciting and sad to see that these GEER projects are coming to a close. But I'm also excited to see, the final reports on all the great work y'all have been doing to support the students of Texas. So first of all, I really appreciate all your effort and attention to this. I can only stay on till 11 today. I have basically 3 competing things going on right now. I'm trying to get my continuing legal education finished today, and then I have another meeting that I have to be at 11. So kind of all over the place, but wanted to provide you just some information that should be helpful to you in the closeout process. And the first one really is just talking about, important dates, because this is all going to be very time sensitive. The first thing to keep in mind is that your grant agreement is what controls when your final reports and closeout reports are due. So always refer back to that grant agreement, NOGA. If it's a NOGA, that information will actually be in the initial RFA request for application. So that will have the detailed information. I also believe all the grant managers have been communicating with you regularly on what those dates are, what the forms are, how to submit those reports. So always go back to that. Because we have so many different grants, those dates do vary. So we'll talk about the drop dead dates on GEER, but your responsibility is going to be based on whatever is in your specific for your grant program. Generally speaking, most of the grants will require 2 or 3 different things. Most of them will require a program report, which is a narrative report. They'll require a final budget report or expenditure report. And then many of the grants will also include some student level reports. So just keep that in mind on, what we're looking at here. it all needs to be, the closeout ones are your final ones. Like, you can't supplement them, you can't amend them, and we need them submitted by the due dates. And we'll talk about why that's so important in a minute. But once again, go back to those, their grant agreements, your NOGAs, and talk with your grant manager. If you have any concerns, issues, problems that arise, the sooner you can let us know about those, the better. So let's talk about where, some of these dates come from, and keep in mind that these GEER funds originated from a grant from the U.S. Department of Education under the CARES Act. That grant was made to the state of Texas, to actually the Office of the Governor. So the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board is actually a subrecipient of these funds. And then y'all are subrecipients of the funds as well. Under GEER, the funds must be obligated no later than September 30th, 2022. That September 20th date includes the federal tidings period. It's a 120-day tidings period, so that date includes that. There are no extensions allowed on that. It is a set date. It's not going to change. And obligated has a unique definition within the CARES Act. So we're going to talk about that next, on what that obligation actually means. But if you are receiving those funds, basically what it means is that you have to expend those funds by September 30th. And the next slide will provide more detail on that. Because like in layman's term, obligation, usually means that, okay, like you've contracted for some type of work to be performed. That's not true under GEER 1. And so if you actually look at the definitions in the CARES Act, obligation is defined for work performed by the state or any state entity. It's when the services are performed. So a lot of your grants will have an expenditure date of September 30th. This is why. It's because there's several different ways obligation is defined under the CARES Act, but the one that kind of takes precedent for us is the work performed by state or state entities. Public institutions of higher education are considered state entities. Therefore, obligation is defined as when the services are actually performed. That means they've been obligated. Technically, that has the same that meets the same definition of what you think of as an expenditure. So to keep it simple for you and to ensure that we are meeting the federal requirements here, we are requiring that the grant funds be expended. That means the work's performed and the money's been paid out no later than September 30th. That is the end date. Some of your grants may have an earlier date than September 30th, but in no event will that date be later than September 30th, 2022. Ginger, do you want to go on the next slide? Okay. So what does that mean for your closeout procedures? Well, that means that you need to first make sure, and if you have any questions about what's allowable cost and what's not, go back and review the presentation we did on this several months ago. Contact your Office of General Counsel or any grant support you have at your institution. But basically, we need to make sure is that you have expended the funds and paid them out no later than September 30th. There's a couple items you need to pay particular attention to in closing out this grant. One is that you are allowed to retain up to $500 of any earned interest on the grant award. Anything above $500 needs to be returned to us. When you return it to us, basically, like, we don't get to do much with it. What'll happen is we will then take whatever money we get back, submit it back to the Office of the Governor, and the Office of the Governor will then have to send that money back to the Department of Education. But you're allowed to retain up to $500 of any earned interest. The other requirement is that, you know, a lot of times we think of, you know, we all do taxes and like the IRS allows you to like round up or round down. So it doesn't have to be, you know, the exact number of the amount you earned or any, you know, tax write-offs you may have. That's not the case with these federal grants. The expectation is it needs to be reported down to the penny. Every penny matters when it comes to federal funds and federal grant funds. They expect that you be able to have a full accounting down to the penny. If we see a discrepancy in what you submit in your closeout report based on everything else you'd submit, like if it's a penny off, we will send it back to you because we'll need it down to the penny on the actual money you spent. And then any funds that remain unspent have to be returned to us. So everything has to match. You know, even if it's like it may be easier to like send back full dollar amounts, you can't do that. You have to count for every penny of these federal funds. And it seems, you know, it may seem, wow, that like seems like a lot of extra effort and kind of ridiculous. But if you actually look at the amount of money, I mean, first of all, it's a federal requirement on any grant, but also if you actually look at the amount of money, $3 billion going out to a whole host of, you know, government entities across the country, if each one of them holds on to a penny or like 5 cents, that adds up to a substantial amount of money. So, you know, kind of keep in mind the big picture here. Do we have another slide here?
Actually, now we're moving into
Okay.
a Q&A for you. So for those of you on the call, yeah.
If y'all have any questions, I do have about, you know, 10 minutes or so if y'all have questions.
Hi, Doug. I have a question.
Yeah.
We are the University of Texas in Arlington, and we have a GEER grant that ends September 30th. So how long does the entity have to get all of the reimbursements from the state? Is it a 30, 60, or 90-day?
What do you mean reimbursements from the state?
Well, what we do is we revolve the money off the state USAS. So we do the draw. That's how we do our drawdown.
You doing your drawdown? Okay.
For USAS. So how long does the our entity have to get that money down? Is it 30, 60, or 90 days?
It'll be, well, it's not 30, 60, or 90. It's going to be, you'll get the reimbursement amount, and then you're going to have to make sure that that is, so the money was on, it's already, you already completed the work, so you're getting reimbursed for it.
Right.
You'll have to make sure that that money is out the door no later than October 30th. So
30 days, basically?
Yeah, if you get your reimbursement September 30th, then yeah.
Okay, then I have one more question. So I realize that logistically, if we want to purchase something in September with a PO, we would have to buy it with a PO, get it received, get an invoice, and get it paid before September 30th. Is that my understanding?
I mean, depending on what your grant agreement says, but yes, generally.
Okay, does that include Pro Card charges? So if we purchase something on a Pro Card September 1, we are not going to get that from our bank until sometime, we won't be vouchered until October and paid. Can we still draw those or not?
You won't be able to draw
down. If we have a receipt that says September.
Possibly, but you won't be able to spend those funds after October 30th.
Well, it would be vouchered in our system, in our accounting system in October, but we spent it in September. Is that allowed or not?
That would be allowed.
So technically, even though we, because our receipt would actually show a September expenditure, it's just that it won't be vouchered in our accounting system until October.
Yeah,
And
You
then
would-
we would still have to draw that down before the end of October.
correct.
Okay.
And
Thank
once
you
again,
so
it's
much.
like, and it would also depend on what's in your grant agreement. So, if you have specific questions regarding a specific grant, reach out to the grant manager on it. Because I'm providing like general information, like each grant is unique. I see a couple hands up. Kristen,
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, thank you. So there's been a bit of discussion and point I'm from UTMB about software purchases in particular, because many of these are subscription based. And we have included those in our initial budget as approved. But the question is, if we have paid for, procured a software that will support the program, and the subscription runs for a year and will be beyond the 9/30 deadline, are we able to continue to utilize that software and pay for its entirety with the GEER grant funding?
So that's a allowable use question. I do recommend that you discuss it with your general counsel. So if you look at the uniform grant guidance on allowable costs, generally like subscriptions are treated, once again, you still have to meet, it's necessary and reasonable for your grant program. And then will it be put into use during the period of the grant program? So where trouble can arise is like if you're buying a subscription like right at the end of the grant program and it's primarily going to be used after the grant program's ended, there's going to be a risk there. And the risk is that by receiving federal funds, you're subjected to federal audit. If the federal auditor comes and says, the federal auditor determines that that was not a allowable use of the grant funds, you will have to reimburse that amount back to the federal government, back to the Department of Education.
Okay, I think where we're getting into some discussion points is that these funds have been obviously available for a very short period of time. We've had to go through a variety of issues with vendors to get these subscriptions and procurement issues. And so, and the program starts after the grant ends. So it's been a little bit of an unusual circumstance. So we will
I understand.
reach out to our program officer.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, the other, like if you're not getting the software until after the end of the grant period, then that's a hard stop. Like that's not allowed.
Yes, we've already gone through the procurement of it. It was
Angela, I see your hand up. I think I have a couple in text too, but Angela, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you. My question is, we are the lead for a consortium grant. So we have two other colleges on our grant. And so regarding the September 30th deadline, if that applies to us, so the consortium members, do they have until that time to spend their funds, or is that the time that we need to reimburse them? Is that our deadline for reimbursement, or do we have that October time period to spend to reimburse them for any funds that they spent up through September 30th?
So they have, depending on when the grant period ends, they would have up until September 30th to expend the funds.
Great.
The grant needs to be closed out no later than October 30th. But once again, it goes back to what that grant agreement says.
Yeah, we just weren't sure if the September 30th was our deadline for reimbursing them, or if that was their deadline to spend their funds.
Yeah, I mean, the funds need to be spent by September 30th.
Okay, but we have the month of October to reimburse them out of the funding that we have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, potentially based on what the grant agreement says.
Okay.
Nicole?
Hi, Doug. I just wanted to call attention to a couple of the questions in the chat box. Some
Okay.
of our members don't have sound. One is, can I receive an October 1 paycheck for my services performed prior to that date? And
Generally, that would be allowed. Once again, it depends on what the grant agreement says. But yeah, as long as the work's done, then yes.
okay, the next question is, if the funds have been spent by September 30th and dispersed to the student, but they never cashed the check, at what point can we reissue to another student, or must we return those funds?
That would have to be returned, unfortunately.
The consortium question has been answered. And someone wrote, the Accelerate Planning Grant coaches have advised us that we can purchase software and the annual cost for September 30th.
Yeah.
Jason Eden says, you referred to Gear 1 being CARES Fund. Does that mean we can expect the coordinating board to be providing Gear 2 and 3 funds at the same point, at some point from Carissa and ARP?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that there are plans for, we have received some Gear 2 funds. Those programs will be announced in the near future. Right now, of course, our focus is on, properly closing out the Gear 1. But there is some potential for Gear 2 projects to begin in the very near future.
Okay, thank you. That's all that's in the text.
And then also to keep in mind, to go along with that, is that, keep in mind meeting deadlines on your grant programs, including these Gear 1 grant programs. The successful completion of the grant program is always considered in the evaluation process for future grant awards. So, it's federal compliance, but it's also something that we use in our evaluation of possible successful performance of grantees in future grant opportunities. So we appreciate everyone's hard work and diligence and working through this closeout process with us. Sherry.
Right. One of our colleagues in the chat mentioned about making corrections to past reporting. Doug, should we go back and make corrections so that in the case of a consortia, all of our reporting matches our final report? And also, will the final report cover the duration or simply be the final reporting period? Really good questions. We're about to send you out full information and instructions about that. If you are in any of one of maybe 5, if you're reskilling, accelerating credentials, or true institutional capacity grantee, or an educator prep, or accelerating credential planning grant, we'll give you full information about all of that. The bottom line answer to that, and I hope, Doug, you agree, is that yes, we want to have corrected information, and it would be good to have, and we've been collecting it all along. So we do encourage you, if you have corrections following interim reporting, that you correct it so that it matches final reporting. Do you agree, Doug?
Sherry, as always, I completely agree with you. Yeah, I mean, it's really important that everything matches up, because any discrepancies will, cause issues for us and potentially cause issues for you. So yeah, completely agree. I see Michelle asked a question about reskilling rounds 1 and 3. Yes, both of those are Gear 1. So like at the beginning of this slide, I think it just said reskilling, but all 3 rounds of reskilling are Gear 1. Right now, well, that's not true. So right now the coordinating board has Gear 1. Currently we have Gear 1 grant awards, we have Perkins awards, and then there are some Department of Treasury awards through Senate Bill 8 from the 3rd legislative session, but none of those were competitive grant awards. They were just requirements that were to go out for other programs. So yes, reskilling rounds 1, 2, and 3 are all Gear 1. All right. Well, thanks everyone. I'm gonna sign off, and good luck.
Yes, thank you, Doug. Nicole, did you see other questions in the chat that needed addressing?
There is one more question. Texas Leadership Scholars Program is GEER. Is it only GEER 1?
Texas Leadership Scholars is GEER 1. That one is a bit unique in that is not a grant. That is a interagency cooperative contract. So that's technically not a grant award.
I had a question. This is Divya from Texas A&M Texarkana. Would it be possible to share this recording with all the participants?
Yes, thank you. We will be following up, sharing the recording, the slide deck, and any post questions that we answer after the webinar. We'll send that out to you as soon as we are able. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Bye.
Bye. If you continue to have questions for Doug, feel free to use the chat. We will be saving those questions and getting them answered for you after this is completed. I'm going to do my best now to fill the shoes of my very knowledgeable colleague, Ken Martin, to walk you through the process of returning funds. Again, feel free to use the chat for any questions. We will be saving those and getting them answered after the webinar. So as you are all well aware, returning of funds is very time sensitive. There are some forms that are required and the accounting must be detailed, as Doug just referred to. So again, the closeout of the grants has to be by September 30. And you just heard Doug explain all of the reasons behind that. And the primary source for when you're closing out your grants, because some of them, as Doug mentioned, may have been sooner than September 30, really refer to your grant materials, your contract or your notice of grant award, and of course, talk with your grant manager if you have any concerns about the date. But everyone's final date is September 30. And we're really encouraging you to be complying with these timelines as much as possible to protect against any possible audit findings related to federal dollars. So again, this is very time sensitive. We have tried to give you all the information you need related to your grants through your grant materials, and complying with the dates as much as possible, really complying with the dates, period, is what's going to protect you against any audit findings. So those of you who have inquired about returning funds, if you've received all of your money and you need to give money back, we have been referring you to our return of funds form. This is just the top of it so you know what it looks like. And this arrow is showing you on that form, there is an actual link to instructions on how to complete this form. So everything you need is on the form when we send it to you. This is referring to all public institutions. If you are a private institution and you're on this call, please reach out to your grant manager for information on how to return your funds. We've had some questions around who is the person that should sign this form. Ideally, the person who signs this form is also the person who obligated your institution in the first place, who signed your contract or who signed your NOGA. So this is the same slide that Doug shared earlier, and it is repeated on purpose just to remind you that when you're returning funds, you must comply with that federal guidelines around interest rates or interest income, and you can retain up to 500, but anything over that must be returned. And again, when you're returning your funds, it must match down to the penny. And that, as Doug explained earlier, is all related to federal spending and making sure that we're returning as much as we can to the Department of Education if we have not utilized those funds. So the same information, just reiterating it here under the title of returning funds so that you're aware of how it all fits together. So that's really everything we have on returning funds. I will stop sharing now. In case we need to go back, I will do that. I'll reshare and go back. but happy to address any questions if I am able. But it is very possible that we'll need to confer with colleagues before we're responding. And so we're hoping to put together a very robust FAQ document based on this webinar. Yes, Nicole.
Hi, Ginger. I'm unsure if you know the answer to this question or not, but in the chat, there is a question about the interest income. Are they allowed to keep $500 total, or is it $500 per grant award?
That is an excellent question. I do not know the answer, so we will.
I can chime
Okay.
in.
Yes,
it is,
great.
hi, it's Sherry Ranis again. It is per award, per grant award.
Great. Thank you, Sherry. And the deadline for returning funds?
We are asking you to do that as soon as possible. As soon as you know you are not able to expend the funds, please return them. But to my knowledge, that same date, it comes into play, which is September 30. So all of the money that you have received must be acted upon one way or the other by September 30.
Question, $500 was only the interest income, correct? And that is correct.
That is correct.
Someone wants to know if the form will be emailed to them. Where did they get the form?
So it will depend on what grant program you're in. Your reporting, your grant team here at THECB will be supplying you with reporting forms, including access to the return of funds form.
That is all the questions at this point in the chat. Oh, one more. What documentation would be required to be able to keep the $500 for interest income?
You know, that's a great question, Sherry again. I actually don't know the answer to that question, so that will be one we will go back to our colleagues about. I believe the return of fund form is the overriding document, but we'll certainly look into that further.
A question, are we able to pay for professional development opportunities by September 30th, but the conference will not take place until October, November?
So again, I think I might put myself on camera so it won't be real weird. 1 second, folks, if I can figure out how to do that. Maybe I don't know how to do that. All right, well, you'll just have to hear my voice. We may have to think about that circumstantially. Generally speaking, we wouldn't encourage that because even if it's really highly justified, you're actually the actual event, the actual tasks, the actual project related work isn't taking place till after the grant period. So I don't think we would encourage that.
Okay, next question. How would you handle going over on a particular part of the budget in the grant? For instance, number of hours worked on grant are over what was anticipated and pay is more due to that.
Right, so this is going to differ by program, but I'll speak for about half of those programs are run by my team that we're talking about today. We anticipate budget evolution and changes in project parameters. Budget changes are things that in your RFA or in your grant agreement or in your contract are often addressed, and it gives you a process for approval or a process for going ahead with changes. So it usually depends on the size of the change in the budget, whether or not you need to get approval from us or not. But we always welcome and appreciate being told if the budget's changing. A budget category like time charged to a grant could always change, very, very, very frequently change. And that's not a problem. It's as long as you document it properly internally and also share it with us. And then in your final, it's reflected in your final reporting.
Okay, thank you, Sherry. The next question is, will returning of funds be viewed as a negative attribute if a team applied for GEER 2? It was a real challenge to expend all funds given availability of items such as computers.
So Ginger, I don't know if you want to handle that one. I have my own point of view on that one, but I think it's something that we all understand. This has been an extraordinary and unique circumstance that we've just lived through for about 2.5 years. And the GEER funding and in the conditions of the pandemic were unique, extraordinary, and challenging. And the challenges have not stopped. Over the past year in particular, the supply chain issues, which is just a broad way of saying, a lot of different difficulties, right, have been challenging us, and the short terms of these grants haven't helped either. We recognize all of those things. So I don't believe we think returning the funds is a negative necessarily. We're actually more worried about timely return of funds and timely reporting. Those two things are very, very important to us. But returning funds per se, we understand. We've been urging and trying to monitor the flow of funds to you all, the expenditures that you've been doing. And you're doing your best. We really want you to spend the money. That goes without saying, but we also understand that sometimes it's just not going to work.
And I agree, Sherry. I've not heard any communication on our side that views returning of funds as something that would incur a punitive measure.
Great, thank you guys. The next question is, are we able to purchase testing materials for students enrolled in courses that begin in September but end beyond the September 30th date? Those materials used at the end of the course.
So that's very similar to what Doug responded to earlier. That the point is that your activity is germane to your project and is happening before the end of the grant period. That some of it will happen after the end of the grant period is okay.
Next question is it still possible to get approval if needed?
Sure. I think it depends on the project, but we stand ready to approve or give you more insight about budget changes that seem necessary at this point in time, even though we're only 4 weeks away from the end of the grant period.
Someone wrote.
Ginger, I don't know if you want to chime in on that one.
I mean, we are at the ready to be as flexible and supportive as we can be for your needs.
Precisely.
Okay, in the February meeting, you said that if the changes are below 25% in any category, you are good.
That's still true.
We are paying for training materials and certification examination costs for students. We will pay for these prior to September 30th, but technically they won't be fully used until the end of the semester in November and December. Is this okay?
I would urge you to contact the team that is your grant team here at THECB just to make sure so that we fully understand the situation and we can help you work through it. And we can give a yes or no answer. Again, that's a similar question to previous questions about purchasing before the end of September, or doing the purchase order or doing the expenditure before the end of September 30th and having ongoing use. So we would need to probably know a little bit more information to be able to give you guidance on that.
Okay, at this point, that's the end of the chat questions.
Okay, great. Well, we can hang out for a few more moments. Well, we blocked a good bit of time for Q&A. So thank you, Sherry, for chiming in. As she mentioned, really about half or possibly more of the programs through GEER 1 are run through her team. So she is an expert, well, by experience. In
no, none of us classify as experts in these kinds of situations, as unique as they are. Right, so I was hoping someone would ask that. Someone, Sally Kay, thank you, asking the question if we're going to get further instructions from our specific grant managers. Correct, you are. For the programs that my team runs, either tomorrow or Tuesday, you're going to be getting a set of actually, we created a hub for you to do all your reporting and return to funds work. And you'll be getting a link to that hub, instructions for that hub, information, guidance on how to do it. And you can lean on our staff to ask questions and hopefully about using the hub, about the reporting itself, whatever else you need. Reporting for each of these 10 GEER programs, GEER 1 programs, is unique to some extent. Every program has slightly different parameters, slightly different purposes. So the report forms, even though generally, as Doug said, they cover program, expenses, and if you have financial aid, student level reporting. Beyond that, though, they can get a little specific. And so we have specific forms for each of our each of our grant programs. And hopefully that process will be easier than doing large Excel spreadsheets and attaching them to email. That's what we're trying to avoid. And also give you access to the return of funds information all in one place. So that is, as I said, either Friday or Tuesday are going to be opened up to all of you, and any feedback you have about that hub, that reporting hub, let me know. But the reporting portion of this, I hope everyone understands, is so unique to each program. This workshop we wanted to do the stuff that is universal, which is regarding the return of funds stuff, the dates, the reasoning behind the stuff, and again, evoking what's allowable. The final reports are due October 28th for the programs I just mentioned, the 5 programs that my team does. You may have a different reporting requirement date if you're not one of Reskilling rounds 1, 2, or 3, accelerating credentials of purpose of value, accelerating credentials planning grants, educator prep grants, and true institutional capacity grants. If you're another grant program, you may have another date. Do check your grant agreement to confirm what reporting date is required. We're hoping that 2 months is enough. I know it's not, especially at the beginning of the start of a school year. You're all very, very busy, but we're trying to give you as much lead time as possible on the reporting.
Any other questions?
Oh, yeah, there was. Here's one, Ginger. Please clarify what forms need to be submitted if we need to return funds. So there's one form. There's the return of funds form for GEER. And what we tried to indicate to you is there's a return of funds form, and you just fill it all out, send it in per instructions by your grant managers, your TATCB. In our case, you're going to send it in through our hub that we created. And then you're going to transfer the funds to TATCB. If you don't have instructions on how to transfer the funds, we'll provide instructions on how to do that. That's kind of sensitive information. We want to do that very carefully, but the transactions are 3 parts. You fill out the form, you send in the funds, and if you need transfer of funds instructions, we'll provide those to you.
Sherry, there is a question about True Grants. The final report is due on October 28th, but return of funds due September 30th. Is that correct?
That's correct, and that's correct for all the grant programs I just mentioned. Yes. The end of the grant period is September 30th. The reports are due October 28th. And funding return is September 30th. Yes. Sorry, yes.
So what happens if students in Reskilling grant register for courses we paid tuition and they drop? Would we have to return those funds?
Thank you for that question, Derek. So this is one of those situations where Reskilling grants, for those of you who are not aware, are almost completely about financial aid to students, right? And this has been a perennial issue when financial aid is given and a student drops or a student leaves a program. And so the institution has to figure out what to do with those dollars. And that's the answer, Derek. Your institution needs to figure out what to do with those dollars. If they do it after September 30th, I think the scenario is probably return. I can double check on that because again, you don't have the leeway after September 30th to repurpose those dollars. But I think that the scenario will have to be returned.
Someone is asking again, where can I get the return of funds form?
Depends on your program. If you're one of the 5 programs I just mentioned, you're going to get it through the hub. We have a connection to it. Your grant management team here at TATCB for other programs will send it to you.
So as an example, I lead the work-based learning grant, and I sent that form to those who needed to return any monies. So it will be your grant management team who supplies that form to you. Any other questions? Well, thank you again, everyone, for your time this morning. Again, we're really trying to get ahead of the curve here and provide you with information to help you plan. And if you have any questions that haven't been answered today, please reach out to your grant management team. And if you put them in the chat, we'll get them answered for you. We'll share all of this webinar, the slide deck, everything we can possibly share. We will be sharing with you, to everyone who registered, and to all of our grantee point of contacts. We will share this information. And I think
We have 2
more
questions, Ginger.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry as you're closing. That's okay, people.
No worries. Let's get them. Let's get them.
It's great, right?
Yeah.
So one of the questions was, quick question was, if we have, we're going to spend everything but $25, do we have to send the $25 in? Yes. If it was 5 cents, you'd have to send that in too.
Yes.
That's what the point of the penny discussion that Doug had, fortunately. Another question here: if students who get stipends for a practicum drop, must this money also need to be returned? And the answer to that is yeah, if it's after September 30th, because you won't have an opportunity to repurpose it. And then another question: are final reports cumulative? Great question, actually. Subtle question. So I'm going to answer for my 5 programs, but folks, please chime in. The answer is yes. These are final reports. And so when we ask you questions to fill out in the final report forms, most of the time it's going to be cumulative. It's going to be about the entire grant period. In some cases, we also need reports. If you've done many interim reports, we may need interim report data as well. So it depends on the program. In Reskilling, for example, we've had many interim reports over the past year and 9 months, so to speak. So there may be some interim data still for the final reporting period, but most of it's cumulative. Most of it will be focused on cumulative. Let's see now. I think that Nicole, is that every question from the chat, because they're coming in?
Nicole Los is asking True Grant, Reskilling Grant, and Work-Based Grant. That is, what do you mean, Nicole?
Those are the 3 grants you have. And what is your question?
Which are cumulative.
Yes, they will. They will all be cumulative. Yes.
Yes, they will be cumulative. You'll be giving cumulative information for those. I mean, the point of the final report is a kind of final accounting. And as we were talking about before, we had a question about folks correcting previous reports. And the answer is yes, please correct your previous reports to match your final reports. What you really want to do is see a flow of expenses in particular, right, that match your final result. And you want to do that both for your own accounting purposes, but also for in relationship to the auditing and the look over that's going to happen to these accounts. Inevitably, we have both federal and state audit. We have internal TATCB audit. There's a lot of looking at the paperwork for these things, as is completely appropriate, right? So you do want to make sure that those counts flow properly and correct them if the past historical record needs correcting.
And just to Sherry's earlier point, that flow of monies should also follow your program design. So I know that there are teams on campuses who are tackling all of this, and thank you for doing that. But if you are from your accounting team, for example, you will need to communicate with your program officer for each grant, because the paperwork is not the same across grants, because all of the expense reports are tailored to the programs and how they're designed.
That's right. It's very true. So the reporting side of this is very specific to your program, quite specific to your program. The return of funds form is kind of a universal kind of thing to do, and the overarching sort of awareness of how and why you need to do this is universal for all these GEER programs. Year 2 may be, in the offing, so to speak. More information when those programs are formulated and put out to the competition and/or award stage. More to come on that one. But for GEER 1, closing out GEER 1, we know it's a big deal, and we also know it involves lots of different folks at your institutions. We are so appreciative of how you all are managing this. We know it's a challenge. So please do reach out to your grant team at THECB with any kind of question. No question is too small or too trivial. Okay, here's another one.
Yeah. If it turns out that some payments to students on work-based loans were not cashed after the final report and funds must be returned, are the final reports to be resubmitted showing the change?
I believe the answer is yes, but I'm going to take that back to Doug and confirm.
Which is, I think, always our answers. We always are double checking in terms of federal compliance. It's really important on our side too, as stewards of this funding. What's interesting about this is you have some time, right? We have like October to like reconcile all of this stuff, but we really do need to get it buttoned down. Yeah, thank you for asking that question. The earlier you try to get this done, the better, I guess would be the answer. Earlier in October, the better.
Looks like we still have quite a few people on the call. So if there are other questions, feel free to chime in or use the chat.
This is Belinda Saldana-Harmon with the University of Texas at San Antonio. I'm going to get ready to jump off if we're about done, but I did want to just thank you all for the meeting today, but also thank you for bringing these special dollars to our students. This has made such a big difference on our campus with helping students to get back on track and get back to their degrees. And I'm sure it's been the same around the state. So thank you so much for making this possible for students. We've seen some good successes.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And of course, thanks to all of you for making these programs happen.
We have a couple of more of questions in the chat again. What if we have part-time staff that work hours in September but are paid on October 30th?
So the service is delivered in September, but the pay won't actually hit until October. That we will have to take that question back to Doug.
Okay.
This is Jolene from Austin Community College. I had the same question, so you can disregard that one.
Okay.
Okay. And the webinar from February can be found on the coordinating board website, correct?
Yes, yes. And a link to that webinar is in this slide deck. So when we share that after the call, you'll have that link available. It's on the grants page, at the very top of the grants page. Well, that seems like a long and healthy pause, suggesting that there are no more questions at this point. So again, feel free to please actually contact your grants management team if you have any questions, and we will make sure to get those answered. We will be sharing all of the materials from this workshop with you in email to everyone who registered and to all of our grant point of contacts. Thank you for your time this morning. Thank you for all the work you're doing on these GEER programs. We couldn't have done it without you. Still work to be done, but we will be working with you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We still have about 20 people on the call. I'm just waiting for it to wind down a little more, and then I'll end the recording. All right, colleagues, I'm going to end the recording now.